what these rusty pans have been used for? They have been used for finding gold. Isn't that exciting? Yes, gold hunters would shovel dirt or sand into pans such as these. Then they would dip water into them and twirl the pans. As they twirled, the sand and dirt would fly out, leaving the heavier flakes or pieces of gold clinging to the rusty sides and bottom. Well, that is, if the fellow looking for gold were lucky. Many times there would be nothing left in the bottom of the pan. Well, that was just one of the ways that men looked for gold during the days of the California gold rush. At that time, California had not yet become a state. The land known as California had first been explored and settled by the Spanish. Later it belonged to Mexico. Then, in the year 1847, Mexico sold the land to the United States. So, when gold was discovered in 1848, the land belonged to the United States. But there were not enough people living in California for it to become a state. Let's visit California in the year 1848, and let's meet a boy by the name of Carlos Rivera. Young Carlos Rivera crouched in the blacksmith shop and pumped the bellows up and down, up and down. Sparks from the fire went flying up the chimney to scatter in the California night. When the tire rim for the ox cart was hot from the fire, Rivera, a Mexican worker, helped Carlos lift the rim to the anvil. Then Rivera shaped it with blows of the hammer. While the rim cooled, Carlos stared off into the dark night. It was January 1848, and on a nearby fence hung 6 cowhides. They were the last of what had been the family's herd of cows. By the barn, 2 skinny oxen picked at the small pile of dry straw that lay before them. Carlos looked at them a moment, and then he looked at the ox cart. In a few weeks, they would drive the cart to San Francisco. To himself, Carlos muttered,
"There ought to be some way to stay here. Something I could do to keep us from having to leave the ranch."
5 years before, when Carlos was only 9, his father, Antonio Rivera, had brought the family here to live on the banks of the Sacramento River. He had worked very hard to raise wheat, but his first 2 crops of wheat failed. Then the 3rd crop had been a good one. And one night, as Antonio was coming home with the money from the sale of his wheat, a bandit met him on the road and demanded the money. Now, Antonio had worked hard for that money. He needed it for winter food and to plant a new crop in the spring. He clutched the money to him. He tried to raise his gun, but he was too slow. The bandit shot Antonio dead, stole the money, and rode away. Well, after that, young though he was, Carlos had become the head of the family. He had tried to make a success of the ranch, but for 2 years now there had been little rain. The crops had died, the cattle had starved, and now the little family would have to leave the ranch and go to San Francisco. There, Mamacita, Carlos's mother, would run a bakery. Carlos felt angry.
"It's not fair. If only I had water from my fields like Captain Sutter, I could raise wheat."
Just then, his thoughts were interrupted by a girl's voice calling his name. It was Carlotta, Carlos's twin sister. Screamer, a tame talking crow, perched on her shoulder. Carlos asked,
"What do you want?"
"I came to tell you something exciting."
Carlos looked out the doorway to where Captain Sutter's fort stood in the moonlight. Around it lay green gardens, fed by the water from canals that Sutter's Indian workers had made for him. These canals could carry only enough water for Captain Sutter's own crops. Carlos knew this, and for that reason he'd never asked the captain for any water from them. But now he thought perhaps Captain Sutter, who was a good and generous man, had offered to help him.
You mean the captain sent you to tell me that he's going to let me use water from his ditch?
No, not that. I came to take you to the fort.
I'm busy.
Do come. There's a man there, and the man's got something shiny tied in a bag. It's mysterious.
In spite of himself, Carlos found he was interested.
Please, Carlos, please. It's strange, and I want you to see it.
Oh, all right.
Carlos followed Carlotta across the fields to the fort. They stopped near a lighted slit in the adobe wall. Carlotta motioned for Carlos to bend down. Carlos saw two men in the room. Between them on the table lay a cloth, and in it some dust and shiny pebbles. Carlos turned to Carlotta and whispered,
It's Captain Sutter, and James Marshall is carpenter. Mr. Marshall went up the American River to build a sawmill for Sutter.
They could hear Mr. Marshall talking to Sutter.
I found this stuff by the mill I built for you. Captain, it's gold. Gold. Right up there on the American River.
Carlotta couldn't believe her ears. Excitedly, she whispered,
Gold. Oh, Carlos. If we found gold, we could buy shoes and dresses. A new gingham dress with buttons all down the front for Mamacita. And you could build ditches for your land and raise hay enough for the cows and oxen. Just think. Real gold. Tomorrow we must go to the American River and find it.
You're a girl. You can't go digging for gold.
I can. I will, and you will, too. Now, come on. Let's go tell Mamacita about it now, and in the morning we'll go.
Carlos shook his head and followed his sister. Well, the news got out that gold had been found in California. And during the following year, thousands of men went to California to look for gold. Because the year was 1849, these men were called 49ers. Some of them headed for California, traveling by horseback or wagon train across the prairies. Others made the long trip by boat, going all the way around the tip of South America and then heading north to California. Still others took a somewhat shorter route, going by boat to Panama. Oh, but there they had to cross swamps filled with crocodiles. Those who made it traveled once again by boat to the village of San Francisco. Why, some men even came from as far away as France and Germany and China. Carlos Rivera met a young man from Massachusetts named John Stayer. John had come all the way from New England in the hopes of striking it rich. He and Carlos decided to hunt for gold together. One morning, many months after they'd started their search, Carlos woke up very discouraged. He and John had yet to find any gold. But he got up and went down to the little stream beside which they were camped. John followed Carlos, and Screamer the Crow flew after both young men, calling out, "Gold! It's murder!" John and Carlos tried pan after pan of the sand and found no gold. Screamer flew to peck at a rocky ledge across the stream. "It's gold! It's gold!" he called out. Carlos raised his eyes and sighed.
If it only were.
Then suddenly Carlos blinked his eyes, for before him seemed to lie a ledge of pure white rock, through which wove a solid streak of dark metal. Gold! Carlos gripped his pan until his hands grew white. But then the day grew lighter, and the ledge of rock became just the dull granite of the Sierra Mountains. Suddenly, a sort of rage made Carlos turn to John.
You know, we've been following in someone else's footsteps all along, following the other miners.
Carlos pointed north.
There's no tracks there. Let's try it that way.
John agreed, and they began to pack their things on the mule. In half an hour, they were on their way. They walked all that day and the next and the next. On the evening of the third day, they camped beside a little stream. Carlos took a water can and went down to the edge of the stream to get water for coffee. Across from him lay a ledge that looked like the one he had seen the morning they started out. Screamer flew to it and pecked along the rock, calling, "It's gold! It's gold! It's gold!"
You don't fool me a second time.
The reflection of the rocky ledge lay in the water. For a moment, Carlos stared. He brushed his eyes with his hand and stared again. He dipped his hand into the pool to make ripples. But when they smoothed out, the golden ledge was still there. Then Carlos dared to raise his eyes. What he saw sent his blood leaping through his veins.
Gold!
But Carlos still wouldn't believe what he saw.
It's only the sun on ordinary rock.
But the sun went down, and the gold still lay there. He couldn't help but yell.
Hey, John, take a look at this.
John came running. He could hardly believe his eyes. It was gold. Quickly, the boys moved their things to be down near the gold and make camp there. Then they would wait for morning. For 5 months, Carlos and John mined their gold claim. Then, one day, Carlos said,
We'll have to sell our mine soon. The surface gold is all but mined out, unless you want to buy machinery and work the mine yourself.
John looked at Carlos and shook his head. John was ready to go back to Massachusetts and buy a farm. Carlos looked off toward the plains. He realized that he, too, was content. He and Carlotta and Mamacita had been through all the joy and sorrow and madness of the search for gold. But now he could go home, home to the ranch where they would be able to stay. What you heard today was just a small part of the book We Were There with the California 49ers by Stephen Holt. During the gold rush, life was rough and tough in California. There was much shooting and robbing and killing. Oh, and it was very expensive. Why, eggs were $6 a dozen. But within 10 years, the gold rush was pretty much over. Many of the gold seekers returned to their homes. Still others stayed on in California and tried their hands at farming. In time, California became a very good place indeed in which to live. I'm sure those of you who know California will agree with that. We still have a lot to learn about our country, so you come back again soon. All right? I'll see you then. Goodbye.
The preceding program was made possible by a grant from the Ohio Department of Education.